Finish off the male reproductive system. Really, the rest of the actual tract is not particularly difficult here. We're looking at the urethra, which, again, we know from before it's what's draining the bladder. In males, it is dual-use plumbing, so both urinary and reproductive systems. A lot of times when we're talking about this, we subdivide it into the three different sections of the urethra. Easiest way to kind of think about these ones is the prostatic urethra is the part that is within the prostate. The penile urethra or spongy urethra is what's within the penis, and the membranous urethra is the section that is in between those two. So like it says, they're within the urogenital diaphragm. You can see here is it would pass through the prostate here. You can see also how that is combining with the ejaculatory duct. Here would be from the urinary system. Here would be the reproductive system's contents going in through that prostatic urethra, through the membranous urethra, and again out the rest of the urethra to the body. The penis and the scrotum, as we already know, make up that external genitalia. The purpose here is a delivery system to get the semen to the female reproductive tract. Again, you can look at the different parts of this on here. Most people have had this before, and I generally don't walk through all the different parts of this. But what we're going to see is within the penis, we have a couple different spongy bodies, and we'll talk a little bit about how erection can happen. So the erectile bodies, you have two of these along the dorsal side of the penis, which would be the top side of the penis in this case, those are called the corpus cavernosum. And then there's one along the mid-ventral side of that called the corpus spongiosum. A little bit different in terms of how it fills up. The urethra is in the middle of that one, so it cannot build up so much pressure that it collapses the urethra completely. To me, it kind of looks like a weird bug face when you do a cross-section over here, but you can see there's a centralized artery with blood veins going here. What can happen, and it is basic hydraulics in all honesty. You get increased blood flow into these spongy tissue, decreased blood flow out. You're going to get a buildup of blood in these tissues, and because they have a very strong connective tissue membrane surrounding them, it will build up pressure and generate lift pretty much here, and that is what erection is. So you can see the different spongy bodies here, and it kind of shows you that the head of the penis and that corpus spongiosum, that's all corpus spongiosum. This would be corpus cavernosum here. And again, just another view of it here. So how this kind of works here, it goes back to what we talked about with the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, and this was one of those outlier things here. Normally they worked against one another. In this case, it is kind of combined activity. You need the parasympathetic nervous system for erection and the sympathetic nervous system for actual ejaculation. So the physiology of how this works is, and I always just kind of joke around and say, happy thoughts or a friend, either one of these is going to get increased parasympathetic output to the penis. What this does is cause the release of the neurotransmitter nitric oxide, which is going to dilate those penile arterioles. That's going to lead to filling of that spongy tissue with blood, which will compress the penile veins. What this is then going to do is get increased blood flow in and decreased blood flow out, which is going to fill up that tissue. And again, because there is that strong connective tissue layer surrounding the outside of these spongy tissues, it is going to lead to a buildup of pressure in there and erection. For the second half of this, you're going to get some type of sensory threshold level, which is going to trigger sympathetic output to the penis. Actually, to go back for 1 second here, this nitric oxide, Viagra, and those ones that we've talked about before, it is actually a nitric oxide reuptake inhibitor, and that's why it actually does what it does. But again, once you reach a threshold level here, you're going to get that sympathetic output. It's going to cause, first off, contraction of the internal urethral sphincter, because we want the semen to go out of the body, not into the bladder. So that is going to seal that off so it goes the right way. Doesn't make a left at Albuquerque, makes the right type of thing, if you know the Bugs Bunny reference. other than that, it's going to cause contraction of pretty much the urinary tract muscles, as bulbospongiosum muscles, peristaltic contractions up the vas deferens, and contraction of the seminal vesicles, the prostate, which is going to empty all those contents that form semen into the reproductive tract and then pump that out of the body, and that is ejaculation. How this kind of works is it's a few different phases of this. You have excitement phase, which is the kind of parasympathetic thing here, leading to erection and kind of leading all this tissue to fill up with blood. You then have orgasm, which is the sympathetic nervous system kicking in, causing the release of the semen, and again making sure nothing goes into the bladder. Ejaculation normally should occur at the end of that orgasm. Semen expelled out of the body due to that sympathetic nervous system. With males, there's then what is called a refractory or a resolution phase. This time where no matter what the stimulation is, there's going to be a certain period of time where none of this is possible again. Could be a few minutes to hours, again depends on age and other things there. I always use the analogy as males are kind of like a bolt action rifle, in that you need time to reload before you can fire again. That is what we refer to on this one, where we'll talk about women a little bit later on, but not bolt action rifle. Last thing to kind of talk about here is a little bit about formation of the sex cells. I don't want to get into the really crazy meiosis stuff and all that stuff. You guys have seen that before with biology. The main thing it comes down to is we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each sex cell, unlike normal body cells, can't have 23 pairs of chromosomes. They can only have 23 chromosomes total. That way when those two cells combine, that we get a functional zygote that has 23 pairs of chromosomes. So what this means is the sex cells have to form the genetic material a little bit differently. They need to get one copy of each. Because when we get the sperm cell and the egg cell going together, we need the full set of chromosomes, not double the amount, because that is not going to work. So what we have going on here is we can have some mitosis of some of these stem cells, but when we actually get to spermatogenesis, we're going to have to do some meiosis and this process of actually getting to that haploid sperm, or one copy of the genetic material sperm cells. The main thing on this one, like I said, lots of mitosis that can take place in these stem cells. You're going to get to ones that are going to be getting to these primary spermatocytes. I'm not so worried that you know about the mitosis and meiosis on each of these ones here, but the main idea is we get to a primary spermatocyte, it is going to have two copies. From that primary spermatocyte, we are going to get 4 functional sperm cells on each one. So we'll get to these functional spermatids that are haploid after we go through this meiosis process. To me, that's the main thing to know. One primary spermatocyte is going to give us 4 functional spermatids, which sooner or later will become spermatozoa. And that idea of spermiogenesis is just getting from that spermatozoa, which is the genetic material, to the actual functional sperm cell. You can see this takes place in those seminiferous tubules as they're migrating down. You're going to get these different cells as they're different layers on their way down. They're going to have completed different parts of that meiosis process, and then as we get to the very bottom of those seminiferous tubules, as they're approaching the lumen, they are going through that spermiogenesis and getting from those early spermatids to those functional sperm cells, or spermatozoa. And really, if you look at a sperm cell, it is really, you can see a lot of that cytoplasm and everything kind of works its way around here. We lose a lot of this excess cytoplasm, and what you have is genetic material, or a nucleus. You're going to have this mid piece, which is a bunch of mitochondria, kind of the cellular motors, and then you have the tail. And you can see, again, migrating down, they get to that center part where you're going to get those spermatozoa. And this actually shows it again right here on an electron micrograph. Again, these sperm cells, they're going to have a little enzyme helmet right here, which is going to help them penetrate the egg cell, called the egg chromosome. They have the nucleus, and outside of that, you pretty much have mitochondria strapped to the motor area right here. So when you really think about a sperm cell, very small cell, very simple genetic material with some enzymes, strapped to an engine with the motor. Tail's going to wag kind of like a alligator or a crocodile tail to propel this through the female reproductive tract. In any particular ejaculate, we're talking about 200 million or more of these being released. How we regulate, kind of control this is going to be again with the pituitary system, not the pituitary, but the endocrine system and the function of the pituitary glands. The hypothalamus, we know, has those gonadotropin releasing hormones in the male. If you release those hormones, it's going to cause the anterior pituitary to release FSH and LH. If you remember, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. The follicle stimulating hormone is going to bind to some of the cells in those seminiferous tubules called Sertoli cells and cause concentration of testosterone to take place in the seminiferous tubules, which is going to stimulate spermatogenesis. The LH actually acts on those interstitial cells to release testosterone, which we know will function to help with the sperm cell production. It also is going to go out into the bloodstream and lead to those secondary male sex characteristics. If testosterone levels get too high, this should feed back up to the pituitary and would inhibit the release of FSH and LH, and then the testosterone would stop being made as much in those interstitial cells or Leydig cells. Again, this is why if someone was to inject testosterone, if you do this a longer period of time, it will lead to dysregulation, because if you keep injecting testosterone, it's going to keep inhibiting the release of this. And again, much like we talked about with some of these other ones here, if you do that for too long, you can get dysregulation of the system, and the males will actually lose the ability to make their own testosterone. Sperm cells can also feed back as well. If we're making a lot of sperm cells and they're not being released, you can get what are called the Sertoli cells releasing inhibin, which again will also feed back up to the hypothalamus and inhibit gonadotropin releasing hormone release, which will inhibit the release of FSH and LH, which will decrease testosterone production and sperm cell production. And again, this just kind of does what we just talked about here on that little flow chart as a kind of a little image here. So don't need to really walk through it again, but you can kind of see what's going on here in the different things again. Again, if you were to develop a sex birth control for males, what hormone would you want to go after? Usually ask this in class and let people kind of go and try to figure this one out a little bit. It would not be testosterone. Testosterone would also reduce libido and other things there, so it would work as a birth control, but there probably wouldn't be any sex in general taking place at that point. Also would mess with secondary sex characteristics and would lead to feminization of the male if you were blocking the testosterone. LH, going after LH would do the same thing as going after testosterone, so what you'd actually want to go after is FSH, which would actually inhibit the production of the spermatocytes. Again, to me, I wouldn't trust males to do this. Probably not dependable, especially when they're not the ones that they're not the ones that can actually get pregnant. So it's like, as a female, I probably wouldn't want to trust a male to do that, but that's just me. Testosterone, last thing here, is it's going to do a number of different things, and people have had sex ed and other stuff like that throughout here. I think most people know the secondary sex characteristics. During the early on development, it leads to the production of male genitalia, leads to certain changes in the brain, body hair, the voice box, skeleton and muscle mass. All these things are going to be influenced by testosterone. So this is it for the males. We will do 3 of these shows with female reproductive system, and that will be it.